So I'm going to challenge a narrative this morning and suggest that AI is not just about efficiency and optimization. When used correctly, it can increase empathy and engagement and actually make work more human. My name's Brad Wilson. I'm a principal consultant at Perceptyx. I was employee number 9 when I was hired. We're about 350, 400 people now, so it's been quite a journey over the last 13 years. And to give some background and kind of how we got here, I'm going to start with a little bit of a personal story. When I was 16 years old, I had this crazy idea that I wanted to through hike the entire Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine, 2,168 miles. So I went into my living room with my mom and my stepdad, and I explained the plan, and they were immediately on board. Oh, real quick, quote from John Acuff, who's an author. He says, be brave enough to be bad at something new. I also used AI to generate some images for the stories today. I don't know whose feet those are, but back to the story. So immediately my parents were on board. They were supportive, my mom and stepdad. They said, great, we always knew you would do it. We're behind you. I went back to my room and I thought, that was way too easy. Something's not right. I went back downstairs and I said, I'm not talking about someday after college. I'm talking about next year between my junior and senior year of high school. And immediately the mood changed. The atmosphere that was fun and lively was suddenly not. And my mom was really sharp, and she stopped and she said, well, you know, it takes most people about 5 to 6 months to hike the entire trail from Georgia to Maine. You only have 2 months of summer vacation. So you're gonna have to get permission from your school, and there's no way that they're gonna allow you to miss that much school. I went to a public high school. So like any other 16-year-old would do, I set up a meeting with my principal. And I explained the plan, and I said, this is what I wanna do. And he said, absolutely not. You're gonna miss too many days. You legally can't have that type of absence. Miss all your final exams. If I say yes to you, what if a family wants to go to Disney World and miss finals? I can't say yes to you and yes to everyone else. I'll spare you the details. 2 weeks later, I got called back into the principal's office. He said, I just got off the phone with our superintendent of schools. I was told I have to give you permission. You get to pick your last day of school. So May 11th was my junior prom. May 15th, I took a backpack and a one-way plane ticket to Georgia, and I found myself with over 2,000 miles of trail stretching out in front of me. Now, at the time, the trail had over a 90% failure rate. So there were about 2,000 people would attempt a through hike, and fewer than 200 would make it. And we all knew that. So if you're sitting at a campsite in Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, even Virginia, everybody's kind of looking around. Nobody's saying it, but they're all wondering which one of us is actually going to complete this. And nobody would ever talk about when I finished. It's always if I finished. And then finally, fast forward about 3 months, averaged over 26 miles a day, so that's a marathon every single day. I found myself at a camp within 50 miles of the finish with 3 other hikers that I just met that day, because again, I was going much faster than average in order to get back and start my senior year of high school. And we started having this conversation, making observations about certain things we had in common: character traits, personality, ability to laugh at ourselves, kind of deal with adversity. I didn't know the word for it at the time, but I would say we were describing grit is certainly part of it. But we were wondering, were these character traits that we had at the beginning that weeded everybody else out and we were left, or were these things that actually developed over time? And that sense of curiosity and what separates high performers, the people that can ultimately achieve a goal and those that can't, is something that drove me. I went back. I did finish the trail in 89 days. And again, thank you. And after that, I went back to high school, finished my senior year, which is a little bit of culture shock, and then went on to get my undergrad in communication leadership development, earned an MBA and eventually a PhD in organizational psychology, looking at employee response to mergers and acquisitions, because there's a lot of actually overlap between those. So now, as we look at the world of work today and where we're going, there are certain things that are connected, and I want to be able to talk about those with you. So this is a headline literally from last week, February 12th. AI is starting to threaten white-collar jobs. Few industries are immune. And what's really interesting is, as much excitement as there is around opportunities with AI, and not just generative AI, that's one form of it, but with AI in general, there's definitely a lot of fear, and I think loss aversion is a real thing that is showing up, and this anxiety of what does the future look like. And so when we think about the future of work, according to DALI, this is what engaging employees honestly, I think this looks dystopian and terrifying. But I want to give you a quote, and I know we have some Amazon people here, but this is a quote from Jeff Bezos from about 15 years ago. He said, "I frequently get asked the question, what's going to change in the next 10 years? It's a very interesting question, a very common one. I almost never get asked the question, what's not going to change in 10 years? And I submit to you the second question is actually more important of the two, because you can build a business strategy around those things that are stable in time. In our retail business, we know customers want low prices. That's going to be true 10 years from now. They want fast delivery, vast selection. It's impossible to imagine a future 10 years from now where the customer comes up to me and says, Jeff, I love Amazon. I just wish the prices were higher. I wish you'd deliver things a little more slowly. Impossible. So the effort we put into those things, spinning those things up, we know the energy we put in today will still be paying off dividends for customers 10 years from now. And I would say when it comes to the employee experience, there are also similar truths there. If we focus on what are the things that are constant, that are true to the human experience, that are true to who we are as individuals, we can build on that. And despite the fact that we don't know what the next 5, 10 years is going to bring, we do know certain things that are true today and will be true in the future. And one of those is the role of engagement. And the association between engagement and success, all types of business outcome metrics, have been validated to death over the last 40 years. Even before we were talking about engagement, they were talking about satisfaction. And the reality is, a lot of the results, organizations will sell it as increase in X engagement equals increase in Y. And I've even seen associations like from the hotel industry where they're saying this change in engagement is associated with this change in occupancy rates in a hotel. And to me, I look at that and I say, that is completely ridiculous. How does a more engaged staff member directly influence the occupancy in a hotel? Instead, what we're seeing is those locations that have higher occupancy, they're more successful, higher performing organizations, they're more likely to have higher engaged staff members because it's actually a cyclical relationship. So it's true that engagement does increase performance at the individual level through the application of discretionary effort. And when people put in additional effort, their performance increases and the likelihood of success increases. So what we're really talking about here is the one core driver of engagement is the anticipation of success. And so rather than analyzing data to identify engagement drivers, what we need to do, and what we're using AI to do more efficiently and effectively, is identify what are those barriers that are getting in the way of people anticipating success, both for themselves as individuals and for the organization as a whole. And that dramatically changes the conversation because now we're not driving engagement, which can unfortunately be misinterpreted as manipulating people into higher performance. We're actually creating a high-performing environment and a high-performing organization. And when we do this, that begs the question, what is success? And success comes in 4 terms. We have achievement, getting things done; affiliation, being a part of something bigger than ourselves; affluence, power, status, control. Extrinsic reward is a form of affluence; and then autonomy, freedom over what we do, where, when, and with whom. And one of the mistakes that I've seen organizations make, especially over the last year and a half, is how they communicate return to work or return to office mandates. And often what they misunderstand or downplay is the negative impact that that has on employees' autonomy. And again, I mentioned loss aversion earlier with kind of anxiety around future and AI. Once people have a level of autonomy and we take it away, the emotional reaction to that is significantly stronger and more negative than if they never had it in the first place. And so that's something that organizations are really needing to grapple with. And we also know that that loss of autonomy is not affecting every employee the same way. There are certain groups of employees that are even more strongly negatively impacted by that loss of autonomy. And so when we think about building the anticipation of success, it's not just about financial, and unfortunately a lot of leadership teams, they stop at maybe achievement and affluence, but they don't understand the power of belonging, which is really the affiliation component, and they don't understand the importance of autonomy. And so that's something that's very important. And now what we're doing is we're using the technology to create a more personalized experience for employees within the organization to help every individual anticipate success, again, for themselves and for the organization more broadly. And this is some actual data from a client from a few months ago, and it's a similar analysis that we've done when we look at DEI as a category. The reality is on surveys we're measuring, is there an open, inclusive environment? It's not really a measure at the surface level of diversity. Sometimes it's a measure of belonging. But what we saw in this organization, and I've seen it elsewhere, is at the individual contributor level, women actually reported higher scores on the DEI category. They were very similar at the supervisor and manager level, and then something happens at the senior manager and director level. All of a sudden, the men continue to have higher scores, positive association or correlation with job level, but for women, it drops and it never catches back up to the men. And then, telling enough, there wasn't enough data for women at the senior vice president level within this organization, so we didn't even have a score for that one. Now, I reported some similar data at a tech company about 8 years ago, and one of the executives said, and it was a great question, they said, okay, there's a difference in score between men and women, and they said, is that evidence that men and women at these levels are being treated differently, or could it be evidence that we're treating them the same, but the needs and expectations are different? Because those two situations are two plausible hypotheses that would support similar or generate similar data. And at the time, it was a very difficult question to ask. But now, with passive data collection and other technology, Perceptyx acquired a company called Cultivate about 2 years ago, we're actually able to analyze and answer some of these questions. And one of the early adopters of the Cultivate product and technology spoke at our conference and shared, it was the CEO of the company, he got a report for all of his direct reports, and it talked about positivity, it talked about how often people were asked for their opinions, it talked about how quickly he is to respond to emails and Slack messages. And out of this report for each of his direct reports, there was a clear outlier, and it was his top performing executive. Now, if you think about situational leadership theory, they go telling, selling, participating, and delegating. And when you have your top performers, it's low task, low relationship. You can delegate something and people can execute. That's the way that this top executive was operating. But the report was clearly negative. And he thought, well, that's interesting. I'll just bring it up in our next one-on-one. And she happened to be the only female executive that was reporting to him. And he brought it up. He said, hey, this is really funny. The data looks like I'm less responsive, but we're good, right? And she stopped and she said, honestly, I've been job searching, because she didn't think that he valued her opinion. She didn't feel connected. She didn't feel plugged in. And she felt like the outsider, even among that group of executives. And it was 180 degrees from the way that the CEO saw that individual. So in that case, that would have been a difference in experience that's actually tied to real behavior that now we can measure. It's not just employee perception, but it's actual behavior. And once we can manage that, then we can begin to measure it and bring about meaningful change within the organization. The other thing that we're able to do is when we look at continuous action. So Perceptyx pioneered this concept of actionable insights almost 20 years ago. And for every survey item, we would write possible action steps, questions to consider, talking points. And so whatever came up on the survey, managers could pull this into their action plan. And we always said managers make better editors than authors. So if they feel that they have to create an action plan, we don't want to just give them a blank page. We want to give them suggestions. They're free to write in what they want, but it's a starting point. Now, what we're able to do is actually tailor those in a much more direct way. Again, thanks to AI, because it's not just about writing one set of actionable insights. There are infinite possibilities that come about and opportunities to tailor those actionable insights based on group size, based on function, based on industry, based on geography. And eventually, I believe we're even going to get to the point where we're going to understand the strengths and personalities of managers and individuals and team dynamics to give even better, more specific insight to those managers. And quick aside, a few months ago, I spoke at an event and found myself at a dinner table with HR executive from Match Group. So they own Match.com, Tinder, a whole bunch of dating sites. And naturally, over the course of the meal, people started going around the table and telling stories of online dating, some of them going back quite a ways, and there were some interesting stories. And it got me thinking about this woman that I got matched with almost 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And she had a lot going for her. Beautiful, smart, funny, but she had this one habit. And we lived about an hour away, so we would often talk after work, and I would tell her about my day. And there were times I literally remember thinking in my head, whose side are you on? Because I would tell her about a situation, and she would always take the other person's side. And it was so frustrating. I'm like, I just want to vent a little bit. Now, fast forward a little bit, we both ended up taking StrengthsFinder, and it turned out her number one strength was empathy. And for me, empathy is like not even on the list. And so once I understood that and appreciated that about her, I would actually seek out her opinion. I would say, hey, here's the situation. What am I missing here? What am I not seeing? And often she would say, well, think about this. Maybe they have this background or this idea. And it would give me a more holistic view of the situation. And now, through digital coaching and some of these nudges, we're able to actually build that into the technology. Now, that woman that I matched with, she's now my wife. We've been married almost 14 years. We have 4 beautiful children. And she continues to be a sounding board to this day, but we're essentially taking that superpower of understanding complementary strengths and building that into the platform to create more empathy, to create more understanding, to create some more awareness, and actually foster a stronger sense of belonging, which when you think about AI making work more human, it sounds counterintuitive, but the possibilities are incredible here. We also acquired a company last year called Humu, originally founded by a former CHRO from Google, and they have this science-backed approach where they look at inspiring, a theme and then getting into these specific behaviors. So I've heard it often, and I hate it, but this idea that we did a big survey and now managers have this laundry list of to-dos, and they feel overwhelmed. Now, when managers anticipate failure, they disengage from the process, and they don't follow through. It's our engagement wheel working against us. Rather than anticipating success, they anticipate failure. And so one of the beautiful things that Humo is able to do is deliver these bite-sized nudges in the flow of work, so email, Slack, Teams, it integrates with all of those. And rather than having this heavy load on the individual, and it can also provide nudges for individual contributors, it's actually able to bring about meaningful change. And that's one of the things where they're really able to connect the behaviors to business outcomes, and it is phenomenal. So essentially, this is kind of the model that we're working in Perceptyx, is the listen and analyze. We've been doing that for years, but the activation and the meaningful change, that's where these sustainable behavior changes and fostering belonging and growth mindset and all of that comes to play. Now, it's a little teaser on that. To hear more, we do have 5 one-day events coming up across the country. There is a QR code for more information. Unfortunately, we don't have one in Seattle this year, but we are going to be in San Francisco, Chicago, Atlanta, New York, and London. I have some US clients that are taking this as an opportunity to go to the UK, and I'm trying to pull some strings. Maybe I can go with them. But that's coming up. So I want to give one final story in closing here. As I mentioned, I was employee number 9 at Perceptyx. I've been here quickly coming up on 13 years. 2 years ago, my mom was moving, packing up her house, and had a whole section of old business books in her house. And she said, next time you come to visit, go through, see if there's anything worth keeping, otherwise we're going to donate or recycle. And I pulled this book off the shelf. I'd never seen it before. A lot of the books I actually did recognize and read even back in school or even in elementary school. It was a little weird. But this is one I didn't know. So I pulled it off the shelf, and what actually got my attention is there's a piece of paper tucked in the cover, handwritten notes here. And it says, the most successful companies give their employees a feeling that they have some control over their destiny. They utilize the Hawthorne effect. They pay attention to their employees. We need to build a sense of tradition and pride in our people. Old is not tradition. The pride of being with a special kind of company, a company that sincerely cares about the ideas, needs, and satisfaction of its employees. We need to spend more time developing managers, not just throwing them in a position of sink or swim via trial and error. We need to invest more in our people if we want to get more out of our people. And then on the back is a to-do list for 1984. One of those to-dos is to implement a suggestion box and leverage employee feedback. Now, the date on this is December 1983. My mom was 6 months pregnant with me when my dad was reading this book and taking these notes in his handwriting. This is actually a copy. I don't travel with the real one. I was born in March of 1984, and I lost my dad to cancer when I was 10 years old. So he was not there for my career. He wasn't there to see the through hike of the Appalachian Trail. He wasn't there 2 years later. I walked from Mexico to Canada on the Pacific Crest Trail. He wasn't there for the MBA, the PhD, any of that. But when we think about that idea of what is going to change versus what is going to stay the same, the idea of a suggestion box is kind of comical in light of what we're able to do with technology and what we're able to do in terms of really shaping that sense of connection and being a part of a special type of organization that sincerely cares about the ideas, needs, and satisfaction of our employees. So again, I want you to think about AI in a way that is not scary, it's not a threat, it's an opportunity. And that's really what it comes down to, is psychological safety. And that's what's fascinating if you think about stability, if you think about certainty, and that's where a lot of the research around employee response to mergers and acquisitions and change, two people can be in the exact same situation and one person perceives it as a threat and the other person perceives it as an opportunity. So I think you all are uniquely positioned within your organization to help shape and guide the culture and experience that employees have so they're able to face an uncertain future with a sense of stability and predictability and that sense that they have so much control over their destiny. So I do appreciate you all taking the time, giving me the opportunity to share, and we'll be around all day. So if anybody has any questions or wants to follow up, I would welcome that. So thank you all very much.